This is the Architectural Review filmed round table on the Adelaide Wharf housing scheme in Hackney, East London. And we're now going to talk to the developer of the project, Elliot Lipton from First Base. Elliot, just in general terms, what were the big challenges that when you just contemplated taking this on, that you thought, right, these are the things we've got to get nailed?
I think Adelaide has got two big launch points for us. The first is the launch of a public-private partnership, and Adelaide's success for me is largely down to the way that we worked with then English Partnerships as the landowner to achieve some very long-term objectives. So we did set out not to develop it as a traditional development in which the homes were sold, all of the homes were sold immediately after completion, but we stay involved long-term as the investment and management partner together. And I think that does contemplate a very different style of development to the traditional approach. The second big challenge here is we set out to introduce a much more commercial construction approach to the development, in which we sought to bring in slightly more modern methods of collaboration amongst the development and design team, which we sought to bring in modern methods of construction, some using off-site manufacturing, but we sought to modernise the way that we were doing the delivery so that we could improve the quality, so that we could improve the design, and we could end up with a higher quality product. And frankly, the objectives of the London-wide initiative had quite high benchmarks here. So we wanted to deliver 50% family housing. We wanted to deliver, 50% affordable housing. We wanted to deliver 30% family housing, and we wanted to hit the highest possible sustainability standards. That, on our first development, was quite a high benchmark to try and achieve. The fantastic thing about the project was we worked very well with English Partnerships and with the design team to achieve all of those things, and we've ended up with a product which I think does exemplify how all of those parties can work together to achieve the best possible product.
Tell us a bit more about how the land deal and the takeout works, because I mean notoriously in housing schemes, the high price that developers have been and house builders have been forced to pay for land has had pretty bad consequences on the quality of the built product. Now clearly that's not the case here. How does the land deal work, and how does the takeout work, and how has that affected what you've been able to do at Adelaide?
Yeah. I think the first thing that Adelaide has set out to prove is that high quality development and high quality design doesn't cost more. In fact, it costs 20% less. And if you can achieve that and achieve higher values, then I think you can see that there's a win-win here for everybody. English Partnerships at the time were incredibly helpful in actually taking a delayed land payment. So they didn't receive the payment, the value of the land up front, that they're taking that back over time. And they still will achieve back the full value of that land, but they receive it over a number of years rather than in the first year. And that has enabled us to increase dramatically the number of key worker homes that we're able to sell. So we've sold homes here starting at £112,000 for key workers who in turn were earning upwards of £25,000. And that truly has been a genuine objective to create real affordable homes for London key workers.
And switching to the question of construction and the time that was given to design, I think this project had a lot of research done before you moved in.
Yeah. I think as any new entrant into this area, we wanted to make sure we got it absolutely right on our first project, and so we spent a huge amount of time researching how we were going to deliver this building so that we could introduce those modern methods of construction, we could hit the quality benchmarks we wanted, but we wanted to hit the design absolutely to deliver something that was world class. And I think that we went before we started on Adelaide to work with Simon Alford and the team at AHMM to make sure we could sort of put in place the prototypes that would lead to Adelaide. And I felt very much that in so doing we were investing up front in getting the know-how. And I think Steve sort of referred earlier to the importance of each building not being a prototype. What we have tried to deliver in Adelaide Wharf is a set of principles that can be rolled out and can be extended, and this is very much sort of the start of a new language for development where each of our buildings will look completely different, where they will sort of the massing will be different, the facade will be different, the public spaces will be different, and yet they will have some common themes that will allow us to deliver more quickly and at a lower cost.
So you might say that that what you've tried to establish is a sort of grammar for the sort of buildings that you're going to do, even though the language may be different on individual sites.
That's exactly it.
Can I just ask Steve Noakes about this relationship on the land? I think it's really intriguing, because clearly this is what's made it tick, because on the one hand it's allowed a decent proportion of affordable, but it also means that people who are, I assume, on a shared ownership thing, as they buy a greater proportion of their house, then that helps for the full value to be taken out at a later stage. And this is almost a kind of proposition which says, if you even out the cash flow, then you can produce social benefits and improve conditions for a substantial proportion of people in the blocks.
Yeah, I think within what you said, there's probably two questions, Paul. Actually, the first one is about the ability of when you invest the land into it, and rightly, Elliot said that they've made savings on good quality design, and that's because you allow the project to have time to do it. Because if you're not carrying a big finance charge on a land purchase from day one, it gives you the ability to actually think carefully about things, because there's not that pressure. I have this expression, which a lot of people have heard me say before, about we have the classic meat in the sandwich kind of situation, where you get a very large land value and then the Section 106, and the developer's always looking over his shoulder thinking, I've got to save some money, and it's always the meat in the sandwich that gets the quality goes. Yeah. And the quality goes in the scheme. The only thing that can give in the end is the scheme. The two other things are fixed either end. So I think what we've done is, by the investment process, is to actually give that scheme time to develop out without that pressure, and it means you can get much more balanced activity.
Sorry.
No, and the second point of your question was about finding about the affordable housing and key worker housing, and be able to do that. What it does is it's clearly provides more affordable housing from the outset, because you're still providing normal social needs housing. That's the thing. The key worker housing doesn't come at the cost of normal local authority social needs housing. It goes back to your earlier point about planning consent with Hackney. Hackney weren't losing their normal needs housing out of this. What they were gaining was additional key worker housing.
Absolutely. Elliot, one of the notable things about this development is the way that the nature of the apartments is pretty indistinguishable between private, affordable, social. There are some differences, but there are an awful lot they have in common. Now, I assume from this that when you looked at the sort of standard products that are being produced, whether in the social or the private sector, that you felt there was quite a lot left to be desired.
Yeah, I think that's right. Adelaide, we've actually designed from the outside in, but importantly also from the inside out. So we did start it by going back to the first principles of how a one-bedroom flat, a two-bedroom, a three-bedroom and a four-bedroom should be well laid out. And we have sought to have similarities between the specifications of all of those homes across 10 years. So one of the things that Adelaide has tried to deliver is a proper, genuine mixed community in which social for rent customers do mix with intermediate owners and with private for sale owners. And where we think it works well, because everyone has an identical looking home, there is no variation in the facade, but also internally the layouts are the same, and wherever possible we've tried to keep the internal specifications absolutely identical. That also applies to having an integrated approach to management, and I think if you revisit Adelaide now, a year and a half after it opened, it is still holding up well, because we have one common management organisation running the services across all of the 10 years for us.
Mm. And were you able to learn from the commercial property sector any lessons about efficiencies of process or efficiencies of construction? I mean, has there been sort of knowledge transfer? Your father obviously famously transformed the office market by re-researching it. I mean, is this a kind of contemporary version of that in another sector?
It is. I mean, what we try to do in setting up First Base and the delivery of Adelaide Wharf is to learn from best practice, both from the commercial construction sector, but also from city centre residential delivery in Europe and in the Far East and indeed in America, so that we brought best practice to city centre delivery in the UK.
Because on the face of it, the quality of specifications inside these apartments, I mean, is way above what one might normally expect. Presumably, this is basically a trade-off for whatever efficiencies and economies you could make in the construction as a whole.
I think that there are several factors here that have allowed this. One, we have tried to focus our spending on some of the more public areas, and we've tried to minimise our spending and standardise behind the scenes, the sort of the invisible elements of the building. Secondly, this is part of a very big programme, and I think that English partnerships at the time were wise to look at this as a programme rather than on a home-by-home or site-by-site basis, and that has allowed us to approach procurement and the supply chain in a very different way. And finally, through the architect, we have tried very hard to spec products that really do reflect the highest quality standards we can possibly achieve for the amount of money we have.
Yeah. Any questions from around the table for Elliot? What about the business of actually having to bid for this and going through a European procurement route? Did that hold any particular problems for doing something on your own doorstep? Simon Alford.
Well, I think the interesting thing was actually we were a new partnership of designers and client, and actually First Base was a new company. In that sense, they came without baggage, but with knowledge. And I think what it allowed was actually, it gave us a great benefit for them to win the bid with English Partnerships. Actually meant time was given at the beginning to develop the grammar. You couldn't have developed the grammar at the speed that was necessary to get the building built. So actually it was the time up front that allowed us to talk round. It wasn't just us as architects, it was other architects involved, talking about what were the things, what were the front of house things where you'd spend money, and what were the back of house things where you'd save, what was the knowledge transfer from commercial projects. So I think it was actually the chance to really lay all those rules out. As Elliot said, different buildings, different scales, different finishes, different appearances, but an underlying logic was shared. And I think that was the crucial benefit that, that gave the project impetus to be quick on winning it.
Yeah. Hanif, any observations on...
I have a rhetorical question for Elliot. If design and planning were separated like they are in Holland, do you think it would be better for projects like this?
I think there's a lot, if we're seeking to increase the speed of housing delivery in the southeast to meet the undeniable demand for housing, then there's a lot to be said for keeping some of the generic elements of projects like Adelaide, the invisible elements, and repeating them, but absolutely changing the building so that it reflects its local environment, it reflects its community, and of course you end up with something that's unique on every occasion.
Final one for me, Elliot. What actually turned out to be the toughest challenge on this project, and was it what you thought would be the toughest challenge?
I think that the toughest challenge for me here was actually sort of dealing with some of the occupational issues that come. I think we hadn't really geared up for that, and that sort of did prove a couple of early questions for us, and that wasn't in any way where we expected it to be now.
Yeah.
And the colour of the balconies.
We'll move on to that. Elliot Lipton, thank you very much.